Hey time travelers, people asked me for a long time to give them the best LoRA training settings as a perfect training settings, I guess. And for most of that time, I thought it was impossible because there's so much nuance when it comes to training a model until I found these settings. But with over a year of testing using these settings, I can say that these settings work most of the time, and every now and then, you gotta tweak them. And every now and then, in a rare case, you gotta use different settings, but these work most of the time. Also, these configs should fix a lot of problems for you if you already have a pretty good training set, but you can't get a good model trained. Like overfitting, where it looks all funky and weird, or blurry faces, or the model just never learns the face. This is my look of disapproval. Here is the document for this whole video, and it also goes over all the configs in Kohya that you need. And it's available on my Google Drive folders, which in this case is available for anybody that's on my tier 2 or higher on my Patreon. You go into tier 2 folder and then go into undocumented solutions plus video scripts. And then scroll down and it says LoRA adafactor best LoRA training settings. All right, about adafactor, adaptive learning rates with sublinear memory cost. I don't understand this part, but I do understand this part, the adaptive learning rates. There's a few optimizers in Kohya that use adaptive learning rates, including AdamW8bit that I went over in my previous LoRA training video. In that video, I was using Lion and AdamW8bit because, you know, the video is talking about 2 different ways to train a LoRA. You can click the card up above and bookmark that video or something if you haven't seen it yet, because I'll mention later in this video something that you still may need from that video in the future. But then after I was doing that testing, I was working on doing a video for adafactor and Prodigy. And adafactor turned out to be many miles ahead of Prodigy, so much that I abandoned it in favor of adafactor. And all of my recent LoRAs that I've released on my Patreon have been made with adafactor. These configs use settings that I went over in previous videos, including SNR and gradient accumulation steps, as well as changing the optimizer, obviously, which is adafactor. I'll have this article linked in the descriptables below. I'm not going to get too much into the math or all that other... Shut up! Random pop-up, you're not in the scene. But, yeah, I have already talked about enough technical details about this in, you know, relevance to this video. So I think it pertinent that I mention why SD 1.5 and SDXL are still relevant, which is the configs I'm going to be going over in this video. And also why I still use SD 1.5 and SDXL, even though it looks like some folks have moved on to other models like Flux. Keep in mind that if you're one of those folks that makes a lot of cool stuff with Flux or SD3, that in theory you can transfer a lot of these settings over to a training for them. So for Stable Diffusion 1.5, is superior with resource efficiency. It uses much less VRAM than newer models. It has an established ecosystem with a vast library of community-created models and other resources. And also, SD 1.5 is very adaptable to fine-tuning with embeddings and other LoRAs. SDXL, or Stable Diffusion XL, has a superior image quality. SDXL produces images with significantly higher resolution and detail and excels at generating photorealistic images and complex compositions. SDXL is better at interpreting and accurately translating text prompts into images, requiring less complex prompting. And another thing about training SD 1.5 or SDXL, and also generating images from them, is that if you're using SD 1.5, you can do the training and image generating on a GPU that only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. And for the SDXL, you only need 12 gigabytes of VRAM. At least that's what I was seeing in all my testing. I won't show you any uncensored anything in this video, including nude art. But if you use these settings in this video, as well as the concepts that I went over in my previous video about getting better body shapes with the trained LoRA, you will get better results with SD 1.5 and SDXL that you can't just get with Flux or SD 3.5 because they just look like they have plastic skin. Models like SD 3.5 and beyond aim to further improve upon SDXL's capabilities, often focusing on speed, efficiency, and even greater realism. But look at these images on the screen, and you'll agree that there's a huge issue here. Some people can get better stuff, but they're using complex, comfy UI workflows, and it's just too much of a headache for me, at least. And Flux uses much more system RAM, and I don't want to focus on only the small portion of the community running on an unobtainium RTX 4090 or RTX 5090. So moving on, and now briefly I'm going to talk about setting up your training images in folders. Here's a data set that I'm currently working on right now for Haley Atwell, and I got a V2 there because it's what I do when I go and I improve my data set after I do a training and it doesn't look that good, and I go and I find the images that were most likely making the training, like make the face blurry or whatever. But I went over this in my better body shapes video, but I found out a new trick. I mean, how I have 3 folders here: a main one, a face one, and a doubles one. If you haven't seen my better body shapes video, you need to see that. Well, I found out that if you have 2, for example, like this, that you want to do repeats 25 on both of them, the folder would have the same name. It gets the repeats from here, and then the instance prompt from here, and then the class prompt from here, and it ignores the rest of the folder name. So you can sort them this way. So this is a hack.
Hacks.
You can put a label at the end of your folder as a note to yourself about what's inside. And I like to use all caps for the note to myself because it makes it easier for me to see really quick. I did an experiment with my KC roll training where I trained my LoRA one way, and then later on I put the folder names with the notes in all caps at the end, and you could see that Kohya completely ignored that word at the end of the folder name and trained these 2 LoRAs exactly the same. Now this one is a SDXL data set, so the dimensions on all these images is 1024 by 1024. Now here's a Martha Hegard, I can't say her name, sorry, data set, which is also an adafactor data set, and oops, yeah. She didn't have that many pictures, so I had to find a screen cap of a nude pic. Sorry. Here's one. Okay, this one's 768 by 768. They're all 768 by 768. The point is they all have a high enough resolution and quality for the training. You can train from a data set of 512 by 512 with SD 1.5, but SD 1.5 can go up to 768 by 768. So if you have enough pictures that are big enough and clear enough, then do that. Here's a screenshot from Hardware Info 64. And I was doing a training on my RTX 3090, and I was hitting about 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So you'll be fine. If you want to see more information about using a GPU with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, I recommend the video that I did on the RTX 3060 12 gig if you haven't seen it yet. And you can, you know, boop, get that there or down in the descriptive box of thing below. And I'm actually going to go over the self-promo section of the video before I get into the configs. Just really quickly. On my Patreon, if you go to sign up, you'll see that there's 3 tiers, but there's actually 4, and there's a lot of people in the free tier because there's stuff you can get for free if I mention it in any of my videos. Or you can just, tier 1 gets all my LoRAs that I train and with a single prompt image for each one and any notes if I needed to save any. Tier 2 gets every prompt image when I generate different styles or whatever for my LoRAs. And when I work on videos, I make scripts or configs or things. Those go into separate folders. Tier 3, you get the training data sets that I use to train my models. And there's going to be a 5th one here. It's going to say tier 4 because you got free 1, 2, 3, 4. And tier 4 is a new tier, and it's going to have all the art I generate, including SFW, some slightly NSFW stuff, you know, bikini or whatever, and one step up from my better body shapes, which is fine art nude. This is a video when I'm announcing it because after figuring out how to get better body shapes, I spent a great deal of time utilizing the adafactor settings that I go over in this video, making decent art for you all. I make 16:9 stuff for stuff like TV frames or whatever you want to use it on, or like if you have your TV set to like have a screensaver. Also, I make 1:1 square stuff for maybe if you want to crop that, and none of my art has any watermarks in it, and all of my art is in both 1080 and 4K depending on what you need. So head over to my Patreon and check it out. All right, now let's move on to the most important part of the video, the configs. First, we're going to go over the configurations for an SD1.5 training, and then I'm going to show you which settings are different for SDXL. I do have the configs available for anybody that's a tier 2 or higher subscriber on my Patreon. You just go to the Google Drive folder, go into the tier 2 folder, and then go to configs, and then Kohya configs. And you'll see right here, SDXL 1024 adafactor, and then ST1.5 768. Get the one that says adafactor here. And I also have the Lion and the AdamW8bit for 768 SD1.5s, as well as 1024 SDXL. These two didn't exist before. People asked for them a couple of times, but I figured out those LoRA configs back before I was really messing with SDXL. So I did do some testing and make sure these worked, and I put these in the folder here for you guys as well. In most cases, you do not need to use regularization data with adafactor because it doesn't need to be regularized. So here's 2 times that I trained Ella Purnell, and we'll zoom in on her face. Ignore where it glitched and drew boobies, and even though I didn't want it to. But look at her face here. Going across, it's just the different steps of the outputs of the LoRA, and going down to the one that does have regularization data, you could see that it's not improving the face, really. But with Sandra Bullock, I couldn't get a good enough training data set, so you can see how it looks funky and weird, and is not learning her face really, even after step 600. And you'll notice that most of the time with adafactor, it's about 600 to 900 where it'll be done. And you think, oh, that looks pretty good there at 900. But no, look at the eyes, they're off. Now, here's the same thing where regularization data was used, and it improved it. So, yeah. Still doesn't look like her, but it doesn't look as crazy. You don't need to use regularization data unless your data set is difficult to work with, and you've made it to where only a couple of the images are kind of so-so iffy. Some of my viewers are using the older Kohya GUI because I have instructions for getting this older version working, and this older version of Kohya works perfectly fine with training an SD1.5 or an SDXL LoRA. And it includes features that are now missing from the new GUI, like when you're done setting up your config and you need to save as. Like the save as button is gone. This is my look of disapproval. That obviously will be linked down below in the thingly-do, or the card up there. Just to quickly, I'm not going over the settings in here. You've got your folders where you set up your image folder, and you usually don't need regularization images, your output, and your logging, your training comment, and your model output name. This is the name of the actual LoRA files that come out. Your parameters are all in here, and then the advanced section is there. So these are all the sections that I'm going to be poking around in, except I'm going to be showing you these settings in the newer GUI. So let's get started with going over the settings for an SD1.5 training. So here's Martha Higarda. Maybe I said it right that time. One of the frustrating things it makes me just grind my gears in the newer GUI is that there's no save as button.
You know, that really grinds my gears.
So what I end up doing is making the training output name, and then having to write this whole path in here, and then copy pasting this part up to here, and typing .json at the end, and then hit the save button. But moving down to the important things that are different. For SD1.5, you want to download this file. If you don't have this yet, then you need this. This is the base checkpoint for SD1.5. The one that people were using in here before that's built into Kohya isn't as good for training. And I'll have this linked in the description below, but it's on this Hugging Face page. You have to click over here to download it, and then it downloads it. And since I use Forge, I'll show you where that folder is for Forge. Stable Diffusion Web UI-Forge, and Models, and then Stable Diffusion, and drop it in there. Or anywhere, it doesn't matter, because over here in Kohya, you've got this folder open button. You hit that, and I actually have mine in my Automatic1111 folders. So I'm just quickly going to that folder, Models, Stable Diffusion, then select Folder, And then once you do that, you can scroll around and find the v1-5-prunes.checkpoint. And since stuff like that is a pain in the butt to click through and get it correct, as soon as you do one of those, then you go back and you hit the save icon up here. Your image folder is right here. You guys should know about that. That's the folder where you've got all the subfolders for your training. Quickly, I'll show you this one. You know, all these folders are in there with the repeats and everything. You need this folder to be like right there. And this really, you know, it used to be in Kohya down in the folders section, which made more sense, but I digress.
My nightmare began on a day like any other. So technically, I guess that would be a daymare. But I digress.
Take a look at what I have for the trained model output name here. These are all the settings that I tested to iron out a good adafactor training, which are batch 3, epoch 5, adafactor, blah, 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 all this other stuff. Any notes that you need to make to yourself in this training should be in here, as well as your instance prompt at the beginning. So it reminds you when you're generating images, how to trigger it. And this should actually be copy pasted as your config file name up here. As you can see, I've already done that. That way your file names represent the actual model name that Stable Diffusion recognizes. This part down here, you shouldn't have to mess with for SD 1.5. If you're messing around with other models, you will, but we're not going to be changing any of these settings for SD 1.5. Now scrolling down over to the folders section. For the output directory, this is what I recommend. Go into your Stable Diffusion Web UI or Web UI-Forge, wherever you keep your LoRA files. And then you see how this folder is LoRA, and then I put a testing folder in here. Open this folder up, and then copy paste this path to right here. That way, if you decide not to keep this training, you can just blow it away, but it's already in the folder that your Forge instance or some of my users are going to be using Comfy UI. So have them output to your whatever folder your Comfy UI is looking for. That way, testing goes much faster and you're not moving files around. You're only moving that one LoRA later that you want to keep out of the testing folder. Logging folder, I recommend that you use the folder that's a parent folder of where you keep the training data set. I'll show you what I mean. Here's a training data sets. There's plus nude folder because, like I showed you on accident earlier, there's some that show her chest. I wanted to compare for that particular LoRA. Anyways, so in this case, I have the Martha Higuereta folder, and then inside of that, I have a folder where I keep the config files and also the logs. These logs are good for anybody who's keeping an eye on TensorBoard. Most of the time with adafactor training, you will not need regularization data, so this thing will be empty. And I'll briefly go over, like, if you have to put a folder in here, you browse for a folder with that button and then browse to it in there, or you could just copy paste the path in. And you need to have training regularization images that are the same resolution as what resolution you're training in Kohya. So in my example right now, I'm training 768 by 768. And you can see right here, all these images in this folder are 768 by 768. But you don't put this folder path in there. You put this folder path in there. So that when Kohya looks in this folder that I've named the woman training folder, it sees that there is a 1_woman, and that tells Kohya 1 repeats, and the prompt for everything in that folder is just the word woman. So normally, like at regular training, you have instance prompt and then class prompt, but in this case, you just need the class prompt. Scroll down and we're going to do the parameters. We're not using a preset. You change the LoRA type to standard. Your batch size is going to be 3. Epoch is going to be 5. This is the trick to getting it to stay under 8 gigabytes consistently. And by 8 gigabytes, I mean 8 gigabytes of VRAM use. Myself and people in the Discord channel did tons of testing, and batch size 3 works well for training if other parameters that I'm showing you in this video are set up correctly. The SDXL config works the same and uses about 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And I'll go over that later during the SDXL config section of this video. And for the max train epoch, I don't have a problem with the newer GUI. This is a problem that I discovered with the older GUI. I don't know if it's really a problem, or maybe it was just normal. But if you have a 0 here, it will ignore this number and not do any training at all. So just set this to the same as whatever you have your epoch to be. Change your save every n epochs to 0 because we need outputs more often, and I'll show you where in a minute. Also for your memory, you want cache latents and cache latents to disk to be checked. These both have to do with how certain things are handled in the memory, as in the VRAM on your GPU. Helping a SD 1.5 training stay at around 8 gigabytes of VRAM use and an SDXL one at about 12. Your learning rate scheduler has to be adafactor, and here's the hack.
Hacks.
The scheduler is normally like cosine or constant, based off of my previous videos and maybe other videos you've seen elsewhere. It's adafactor for both the optimizer and the scheduler. It's the only one that I know of where it does its own thing for the scheduler and the optimizer. I don't change any of these extra arguments for SD 1.5. Learning rate is 0.3 zeros and a 1. Okay? Max resolution has to match your data set. All your images should be the same resolution. So again, for SD 1.5, it's going to be 512 or 768, but it's a comma that you put between height and width. We don't use buckets. We got a better solution by having the doubles folder that we talked about in a Better Body Shapes video. The text encoder learning rate and the unit learning rate for adafactor should always be the same as the learning rate up here. So all three of them are the 0.0001. So after setting your learning rate, you can copy paste it to the text encoder learning rate and the UNet learning rate. Network rank and a network alpha, for these, you want 128 in the network rank and 128 in the network alpha as well. We will talk about potentially changing these settings to prevent overfitting later in the video, but the base settings you want to start with here are 128 and 128. Now for the gradient accumulation steps, you want to change it to 5. And if you want to learn more about gradient accumulation steps, I did a video about a bunch of the settings, you know, the main ones everyone was tweaking that I researched online. And in the video is called LoRA Training Settings Tested and Explained. And I ran out of cards. I found out while I was editing that I overdid it and I was referencing more than 5 things, and YouTube only lets me put 5. So there'll be a link in the doobly-doo below that you can click on and watch if you want to geek out about all those settings. You may change this if you want to tweak it later. There's other settings in here you might choose to tweak later, and we'll go over those in a few minutes. Scrolling down, save every n steps. You want this to be 100. I'll show you what happens when you do that. It outputs LoRAs like this with the numbers at the end, and viewers of my channel that have seen a lot of my videos are familiar with that, so that's what you want. If you're not familiar, there is a way to test the LoRA files that were output every 100 steps using the XYZ plot script in Forge or Automatic1111. So if you don't know, then you have to do your homework later and watch some of my previous videos. Clip skip is 2. I talked about that once in a previous video. You do not change any of these things right here. Some people with like RTX 4000 series cards, or even if you have a 3090, this will work. But I tried this on a 3080 Ti and a 3060 12 gig. This did not work. So 4000 series or 5000 series, you can try this to see if it makes your training go faster. Gradient checkpointing and memory efficient attention are also checked. Those are things to help lower the VRAM. Cross attention, you want to change this to X formers. Minimum signal to noise ratio gamma. Gamma. It's like gamma, camel, whatever. SNR Gamma is 5. I've talked about that in the previous video. All this bucket stuff doesn't matter because we're not using buckets. And that's it. And now let's briefly go over what's different in the SDXL settings. Again, I'm not going to go over every setting because most of the stuff is the same as an SD 1.5 training, except that you can use the built-in option for the base checkpoint for the training. You want to use the Stability AI Stable Diffusion XL base at 1.0. When you do this, it will download the model on the first run. If you want, you can download the model ahead of time. The file name is SD_XL_base_1.0.savetensors. And you download it from Hugging Face. You'll get a page like this. but you can still download it. You click right there, and then you download it and put it in a folder with your models, however you have them organized. And you set it up in Kohya the same way you would choosing a SD 1.5 model by putting in the folder path here and then hitting the drop down to find it. If you do that and you're sure that you're on an SDXL model, make sure you check this box that says SDXL if this area appears. If this area is not there, don't worry about it, because that means Kohya auto-detected what kind of model it was and you don't have to change it. Scroll down on your batch size and your epoch. For this, you want 3 for the batch size and 6 for the epoch, because sometimes the training takes longer with SDXL. And this is also a little tweak to keep it under 12 gigs of VRAM use. Scrolling down where it says SDXL specific parameters, this is the section that replaces most of the stuff that we used to have to do in that other box from my previous video for SDXL training, where you had to put a bunch of arguments in a box. Check these first two, cache, text, encoder outputs, and no half of A. And for network rank and network alpha, you put 128 for the network rank and 64 for the network alpha. You can have like 64 for both of these, but that would slow down the training and also make it possible that it may never learn the face. In SDXL more than SD 1.5, these consume lots of VRAM. Scrolling down past gradient accumulation steps, you're going to see additional parameters, and this is the box I was talking about that was in the previous video where we had a bunch of arguments in here before. I'm going to copy paste this and put this in the description box below, but the only one you need is -- network _ train _ unet _ only, and everything else is the same as an SD 1.5 training. I have some notes about some specific settings that you may choose to tweak if you're having trouble training a model and you need to turn something down or turn something up or whatever. First, you've got your signal to noise ratio one. That's real important. If you don't know what that means, that is like minimum signal to noise ratio. The noise is what generating an image starts with, and it also comes into play with training, and there's a balance that has to be in the training, and this number tweaks it. Now let's talk about network rank and network alpha, because sometimes you might want to tweak this. Here's an SD 1.5 time when I was trying network rank 256 over network alpha 128 versus 32 versus 32, which is like a really, really low one. And you can see how high quality these first two images are. And if I scroll down, it's not as high quality. It still looks like a good trained LoRA, but it doesn't look like the target face nearly as much. Here's one I did for Rhea Seahorn, and this is 32 versus 64 and 64. Here's the 32s, and there's the 64s. I ended up keeping that, and it's one of the LoRAs that's in my Patreon folders. If you get what looks like overbaked, where the eyes start to look crazy, like this is overbaked, but this is not so bad because it's not happening all the time. This is just a random seed. Here's a really, really bad example of a LoRA that was overbaked. Those are ones that where you want to try turning down your network rank and network alpha. But remember, the network alpha should always be the same as the network rank or lower. Also try to do a balance thing. Like I talked about earlier, things are not apples to apples in a LoRA training. So turning down the network rank and network alpha, you might try turning up the gradient accumulation steps, for example. So over on the right column, going up and down, we have a Dakota Johnson trained LoRA with network rank 256, network alpha 128. And going up and down on the left column, it's 64 and 64. But the right one has gradient accumulation steps 5, and the left one has gradient accumulation steps 9. You could see already how having a gradient accumulation steps on the left image is making it look overbaked. Scrolling down consistently, you could see the right one's better than the left one, but the one on the right still has some signs of being overbaked. And that is because the network rank and network alpha are too high. Here is a LoRA that I really need to get back to finishing, but for her, I can't get her body shape correct because there's not enough training images of her in tight dresses or whatever to get, you know, the shape around the chest and the hips and everything. But this is Simone Misnick, and she was on some of the Marvel TV shows, namely Luke Cage. And this one is network up here. Network rank 128, network alpha 128, gradient accumulation steps 5. So here's her face, and then here's a picture of her from the internet. And here is the best LoRA that I could train for Sandra Bullock. See, kind of that I did a good job here with the face. Again, it's 128, gradient accumulation, I can't words right now. Gas 5. And here is an example where I was testing with increasing the gradient accumulation steps with the Rhea Seahorn LoRa. And I'll just go over to around 6. That's a good area with adafactor to test. This one's 3, 5, 7, and the one below that's 9. Looks pretty good at 3. Scrolling down. Actually looking better on this image over here. That's gradient accumulation steps 5. Scrolling down, we've got 7. And we've got 9. And you see how the eyes are looking a little crazy? That's a sign that it's overbaked, or maybe that you upscaled your training images and the eyes look crazy. You got to zoom in on the details on your training images to make sure it doesn't do this. But in this case, it's because the gradient, that word I can't say for some reason. Gradient accumulation steps is too high. Now, let's look at some experiments with repeats. Usually with the training data set, your main folder, you're going to calculate your repeats times the number of images should equal about 1,500. So this does look like her at 4,000 repeats, but you can see how the skin is overbaked and the teeth are just like merged. I want to talk about how you can speed up or slow down the training, because sometimes it looks like it's not getting there and you need to speed it up, or like it's training the face too early by like step 100 or 200 and it's already starting to look overbaked. Every now and then you could try increasing the repeats. However, I normally do this just on the face folder. For example, we've got Haley Atwell here. Let's see how many images we have. I can just hit Control F. Put star.png up here, and then look at the number down here on the bottom left. It says 65. So bring up the calculator. 1,500 divided by 65. That's 23. So the folder should be 24. And I made it 1 higher. But the face one, let's see what I did there. Okay, only showing the PNG files. I've got 24 there, and I've got 25 there. So what's that number? 25 times 24. 600. Most of the time I make sure I have at least 20 images in there, and then I'll have a 25 here. So multiplying that is 500. Or maybe I have 25 face images in there, and then I'll have the repeats at 20. In this case, since I have 24 in there, 24 times 25 repeats, that's 600, because it was taking too long to learn the face, and it was learning the body shape faster in my case. Slowing down the training if it's overfit within a few hundred steps. Okay, I mentioned that. You want to try to lower the number of gradient accumulation steps. The default for these settings that I'm giving y'all is 5, so try 3 or 1. But do this after fine-tuning your training settings and always making sure you have enough high-quality training images. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. That's the rule. From my memory, I've only kept LoRa's like this where I've turned this setting down. Turning it up never helped me above 5. You can try turning it up and see if it works for you, but experiment. So adding regularization data images. Every now and then you need that. Like the face keeps coming out crazy looking. I've been trying to work on a Billie Piper one. Let's see here. And for my Billie Piper one, I still can't get it because she was on TV in the early 2000s and they don't have that high res of images from back then. But I was doing no regularization data in the beginning, and then I added a regularization data later. And if you take a look, I basically only have like 44 base images to train for her face. And some of them are like this, where it's got this grain in it that I can't seem to remove. Or some of them where she started to get older and she's concealing her age with makeup, which, I don't know, she looks good. She's fine. It's just I'd wanted to train a LoRa where she looked younger. So here's the old GUI, and I've got regularization data set up in here. And that's a whole other video you guys can watch if you need to learn more about regularization data. Here's the one when this guy, I can't remember if it was on GitHub or Hugging Face, he came out with a new regularization data set. You can click the thingy doozers up there or down belowzers, whatever you want. I don't know. I don't care if you go up or down. I'm not the boss of you going up and down or whatever. Actually, you have to go down into the description box, whatever. I ran out of cards. Shut up. Now I'm going to show you how I fixed overbaked images like this one and that. Well, images, LoRa's, and that, how they came out all crazy. I gotta just show you a little bit of math here. I'm not gonna go too crazy. But remember earlier how I said your learning rate and your text encoder learning rate and your UNet learning rate all need to be the same. Well, if you're getting images like I just showed you a second ago from your trained LoRa, just copy this number and then open up the calculator. There's that number. Just divide it by 2. But before I do that, you can see it's 0.3 zeros and a 1 divided by 2. It's 0.4 zeros and a 5. And just hit Control-C from your calculator. Go back to your training and paste that number into all 3 of those. Make sure you do all 3. The learning rate, text decoder learning rate, and the UNet learning rate. And then go all the way up. I like to hit Control-Home to go to the top. And go over here at the end and put LR underscore that and just paste it like that. And then go to the settings file like this. Put this before the decimal point, before the .json, and paste it in like that. And save it so you have your separate config file. But if you find that doing this makes it train too slowly, I'm going to show you how to calculate training rate that's between the 3 zeros 1 and the 4 zeros 5. So we've got the 4 zeros 5, and we know that's half of the 3 zeros 1. I know I'm saying the wrong number, and people like to say exponents and all that, but whatever. We divide this by 2 again, and we know that's 1/4 training, so it's even slower. And you're like, but I want it to train faster. I'm like, calm down. I'm going to show you how to do 75% of 3 zeros 1. You multiply this times 3. So let's show you a notepad. 0.301 divided by 2. And this one's half, right? And then divide that by 2 again. And this is 1/4. So 3/4 is 75. So this times 3 is that. So it would be 4 zeros, 75. Another thing that I've tried and it did not work as well as the things I just previously discussed is just lowering the batch size by 1, and then make sure you indicate that in your output file right here by putting like batch 2 and then putting that up here so you have separate, so you know which ones are which. So I'm just going to show you here in my notes just so we can do this real fast. You can try lowering your network rank and network alpha. The default for both is 128 for SD 1.5, 128 and 64 for SDXL. Here's a note. It's just like the training rate. If you have both set to 32 and it's taken forever, and you've previously tested 64, and 64 is still overfitting, use 48. I've tried that once and it did help, but like I said before, lowering the training rate for me is what fixed it. And now for the really like geeky stuff about the settings for those of you that care about it. See my LoRa training settings video if you want to geek out about the settings I tested. And see like a bunch of XYZ tests that I did. So you'll be caught up with all the knowledge of all the different settings inside of a LoRa training. I wanted to briefly mention something about how steps and epochs and all that are calculated in Kohya because it can be confusing. And a lot of people have argued with me in the past in the comments about how this works, and some of those people educated me and I educated some of those people, and that's why I'm doing this. So there'll be more people that'll be educated. You know, there's still gonna be some people that are gonna argue regardless, and I'm not worried about them. It's like everyone else that, you know, whatever. Here's a screenshot of the website where they try to explain how it's calculated, but it doesn't mention gradient accumulation steps there, and I tried calculating off of that and it didn't work out. But this website is more information than what you get from the Kohya page itself, because it's not documented there at all. What you could do when a training starts, you wait for a little bit, you can click on the command line console screen while it's getting the training set up, and it will say select in the title bar at the top left, and that means it's pausing. It will pause whatever the console is doing. This always works in the command line for anything that you're running command line. And then there's two different sections where you can see different things it's calculating. You don't really need the first part. It's interesting if you want to look at it, but it doesn't show you the total number of steps. You want the second one, because epochs are weird in Kohya. Just look at the line that says steps for X epochs or whatever, and that's going to tell you the total number of training steps. Like if, for example, if you're trying to figure out this times this times this and this should be about 15 or 100 or whatever steps. When you're done looking at it, just press enter in the middle of the console and it will resume the training. If for whatever reason you don't like what it's calculated and you need to tweak something else, scroll all the way down to the bottom of Kohya and just hit stop training, because the start training will change to a stop button. Okay, if you're still having problems training a good LoRA and you know you have 100% good training data set, you might want to go to my previous video and try one of those other configs. It's really rare, but sometimes you need to try AdamW8bit or the Lion optimizers. The doobly what's it down below, and you have a link and all that good stuff. I've got something to show you here briefly about Lion and AdamW8bit tests. I was doing a Kohya Noble training recently, and I'm not really going to go over too much about what I had issues with on her training, but no matter what I tried for gradient accumulation steps, it wasn't improving it. It was learning her face too early. So then I tried Lion, and Lion is not an auto correcting or auto adjusting whatever what's it's like AdamW8bit or adafactor is. So you could see how it gets crazy later up, but you know, I wouldn't even use an output LoRA from that high up of steps anyways. Down here, you could see it's still learning her face too fast, which was the issue I was having, and it was getting overbaked. And then I tried AdamW8bit, and I was concerned, okay, it's still learning her face too early. So what I ended up doing was doing an XYZ test of all of them together. And all the different gradient accumulation steps in adafactor are all of these first 5 ones. And then the Lion one, and then the AdamW8bit is on the right column. So the left going up and down is just seeds. So just briefly show you. Gradient accumulation, I can't words. Gradient accumulation steps 1, it didn't learn her face at all. 2, it learned it, but it's kind of weird still. 3, it's kind of decent. 4, overbaked. 5, overbaked. Lion, way better. And AdamW8bit, a whole lot better. And I think in this case, it's because most of her images that are available are online or kind of low res. So that's just a good example of where AdamW8bit might be able to do a training for you that adafactor can't. For the rest of the video, I'm just going to be showing images from my LoRAs that I have in my Patreon folders. Consider supporting me financially. It is actually what keeps me going, because I get a tiny paycheck. I'm being transparent here. From Patreon, once a month, it's under $100, but I get about, like $200 or $300 a year from YouTube for ads, which is why I set up my YouTube ads specifically in specific spots of my video that I choose so it doesn't interrupt me talking. And I only put a couple there. My rule is like every 5 to 10 minutes or whatever, because I hate being interrupted when I'm trying to watch a video, and you know how it is. If you're interested in getting your hands on some of the art that I've made that you see here, please head over to patreon.com/RobertGene and check out Tier 4. So, thanks for watching. I look forward to reading your comments below to tell me what kind of results you got. And I'll see you sometime in the past or the future, because time traveling.